And now that we have these functions, we can finally go back into our main component and set them up to our buttons. So we can go to our app over here, and next time, and hopefully the next time we come back to this page and I click on the withdraw button, or we click on the deposit button, we're actually going to be able to use this. All right, we're going to be able to stake our tokens, deposit them, and withdraw them. And it'll hook up effectively to our MetaMask up over here. All right, so enough with the well wishing. Let's get to the good doing. I just made that up. That was pretty bad. All right, so go to main.js, and back in our main.js component, we're going to see here we have our renderer, and we have our table, we have a form, we got some buttons, and we have an airdrop, which will be our bonus at the end. Okay, so let me ask you this. Where do we want to add this stake button functionality? Or sorry, I should just say the stake functionality. Where do we want to add the staking? Where in our table or our form or our button? So go ahead, pause the video and think about that first. Okay, so hopefully you had some good ideas about this. Now, essentially, what we want to do is we want it to be in our button, right? Our submit button over here. So we want it so that when we click on the submit button, that's where we see deposit, right? That's where we can stake, right? Makes sense. So you might have thought, well, then let's write all the logic in this button. But the thing is that when it's a form, we don't have to do it there. The whole point of making this type the submit button is that instead of using the on-click property over here from buttons, what we could do is actually just write it out for the on-submit property in our form. And that, when we click on the type submit button, will execute the on-submit property from our form. Okay, so that doesn't make any sense just yet. Don't worry about it. Just bear with me and bear with me as we see this all written out in action. Okay, so underneath our form, what we're going to do is we're going to bring in the onSubmit property. And by doing this, essentially now we're going to execute the button. This button is going to be hooked up to this. Now onSubmit is going to take an event, okay? And that event, and oops, there shouldn't be double curly brackets. Oh my gosh, here, let's do it like this. OnSubmit, okay. So OnSubmit is going to take an event, and that event is going to execute prevent default like this. And then we're going to call it. And so why do we do this exactly? Well, so the reason why we add this argument to our anonymous function here for the onSubmit is that essentially if we don't put this here, then we risk the onSubmit button to be repeatedly called over and over. By setting up a prevent default, we actually prevent it. We actually set it up so that it can only be hit once. And we're going to see why once it's functioning that is the case. So underneath here, we're going to create the amount, right? We're going to say let amount. And this amount is going to equal an input value, right? So it's going to be input.value.toString. Actually, it needs to be this. We have to use the this keyword, okay, because we're calling it in our form. So this.input.value.toString. All right, so now we're sending our amount that's going to bring out the string value of whatever is in the input, okay? And amount is also going to be equal to web3 utils. We're going to go ether because we want to convert this two-way, right? So we're going to say two-way, and we're going to put amount and ether. And actually, sorry, we don't need to call ether. And we have to grab the web3 from the window as well. So we're going to do window.web3.utils.two-way, amount ether. Okay, excellent. And once we set up our amount, the only other thing that the other thing that we need to do for this button to work is can you guess it? Well, when we click on the button, what else do we want to happen? What else do we want to happen here? Well, we set up our amount to be the string, because remember the amount was the argument in our function. So that's going to be the amount. We've converted it properly to way, because otherwise it's going to be in ether. But what's the main thing that we're missing here? Well, when we click on the button, what do we want to happen? We want to execute the function, right? We want this function, we want the script stake tokens to run. That's the whole point. That's why we did this. That's why we set it up into our main. So how do we do that? Well, we can just bring it in. We can say this.props.stake tokens, and we can call the function, and we're done, right? Well, wait. Well, what's the argument in our stake tokens? What's that argument that we've been writing this whole time? Well, stake tokens needs to take an amount. That's the amount. And that's all the logic that we need for our submit button. Okay, so let's just save and go over this one more time. So what's happening here? So when we click, so in our form, what we do is we have an on submit, right? The on submit takes an event. All right, it's an anonymous function, but we give it the argument event, and we set it to prevent default, okay, with our rendering. After that, we create an amount. This amount, we set it to a string value, okay? The amount is set to the input, the value of the input, so whatever the number is, and then to string, okay? Then we convert that amount to ether, right? For the amount into ether. Finally, and the final step here is that we actually call the function stake tokens, which we passed over with props, and we set the argument to amount. All right, so this is the moment of truth here, right? This has been a long journey to get to this point. So let's save, and let's go to the browser where our local host is running. Let's hit on refresh. So loading page worked. So far, everything's fine. We have our stake tokens. Our MetaMask is up and working. It's connected. We're not getting any error messages. So let's try to stake something. So what happens if I stake 20 tokens? Click 20 and let's deposit. Here we go, fingers crossed. And we're running into an error. And the error says this.input is undefined. So why is input undefined? So let's take a look. And I'm sorry about the anticlimax. All right, so let's go take a look. Okay, so this.input is supposed to be grabbing it from this input. But in my haste, I actually forgot to set this input specifically to the input value. So it doesn't actually know that it's coming from this input. Why would it? You can have multiple inputs. You can have no inputs. So just writing this input and me expecting it to understand that is very hasty and a mistake on my part. So how do we fix this? Well, we want to reference this input, and we can actually do that with a ref property. So we can bring in ref, okay? And with ref, we can set ref to equal. Ref is going to equal an anonymous function, okay? And that anonymous function is essentially going to execute this dot input, and we're going to give the argument of reference of this anonymous function input. And then finally, we're going to set this dot input to equal the argument input. Okay, so that could seem so that might be a little bit tricky to understand, but it's not so bad. Let's go over it. Essentially, what we're doing is we have this variable called amount, which can change, right? And the amount is the input value that we're turning into a string and converting it. And that amount ends up becoming the amount that we're staking, right? In order to do this, we grab it from the input specifically that we reference, which is this anonymous function here, by calling reference and then setting this dot input to equal the input of the argument of this function. Okay, so if that's confusing, no worries. Let's just take a look at it now. Let's see first off if let's see first off if this thing is even going to run. So I'm going to go back into the browser and I'm going to refresh. I know it does it automatically, but I like to do it manually. Force a habit. And okay, so we're refreshed, and now I'm going to put in 20 tokens. And fingers crossed, moment of truth, here it is. Everything we've been working for. Let's click on deposit. Loading, please. And what is this? What is this? Do my eyes beseech me? Allow. The allowance, it's there. Do you trust this site? By granting permission, you're allowing this site to withdraw your mock USD and automate transactions for you. Oh my goodness. And yes, we do. We allow. So we're going to say, yeah, of course we allow. So we confirm it. Once we confirm it, that transaction processes, and now we can actually confirm the transaction and deposit the token. So we click confirm. And if I refresh the page, would you look at that? Our staking balance has now increased by 20 USDT. We have successfully staked 20 USD tokens, and our balance, our overall balance, has now gone from 100 to 80. So it's working. We have successfully created some functionality so that when we submit into our form, we actually get the input from the value. And that input then gets rendered and the state gets updated of the transactions. Pretty awesome.